The helicopter's rotors choked on ice, shrieking metal against metal as the aircraft spun toward the jagged mountain face. Inside the cockpit, Billionaire CEO Sloane Harker pressed her hand against the gushing wound on her forehead and screamed at the slumped pilot, "Get up, please!" But he didn't move. Sparks erupted from the control panel. The smell of burning fuel filled her lungs. Through the whiteout blizzard, she saw nothing but death, until a figure materialized out of the storm like a ghost, running straight into the inferno without hesitation, as if he'd been waiting his entire life for this exact moment. If you want to know how a quiet single father became the only man willing to save the woman connected to his darkest tragedy, and how one rescue in a blizzard unraveled a decade of buried lies, then stay with me until the very end. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The storm had been building for 3 days. Cal Mercer stood in the dim radar room of the Pinewood Mountain Control Station, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen that tracked the airspace over the northern peaks. Outside, the wind howled like something alive, rattling the windows and piling snow against the concrete walls. The room smelled like burnt coffee and old electronics. Cal's shift had started at 6 that morning, and it was now pushing midnight. His back ached, his eyes burned, but he didn't move. This was his life now. Quiet, isolated, safe. He scanned the radar one more time, then glanced at the framed photo on his desk. A little girl with wild brown curls and a gap-toothed grin, holding a toy helicopter in her small hands. Maddie. His daughter. His entire world. She was 8 years old, asleep in the small cabin 2 miles down the mountain, probably dreaming about pancakes and Saturday cartoons. Cal's chest tightened the way it always did when he thought about her. She was the reason he got up every morning, the reason he kept going when everything inside him wanted to shut down. The radio crackled. "Pinewood Control, this is November 7-3 Delta. We've got a situation." Cal straightened, his hand moving to the transmitter. "November 7-3 Delta, this is Pinewood Control. Go ahead." The voice on the other end was tight, clipped, professional, but Cal heard the edge of panic underneath. "We've lost navigation. Instruments are failing. Visibility is 0. We're trying to climb out, but..." Static erupted across the line. "November 7-3 Delta, say again. You're breaking up." More static. Then a burst of sound, wind, shouting, the high-pitched whine of failing engines. "Descending fast, can't see. Mountain..." The radar blip flickered, then vanished. Cal's blood turned to ice. "November 7-3 Delta, do you copy? Repeat, do you copy?" Silence. He keyed the emergency channel, his voice sharp and controlled despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. "All stations, this is Pinewood Control. We have a distress situation. Aircraft November 7-3 Delta. Possible crash in the northern range. Last known altitude 4,000 feet, heading 270. Repeat, possible crash." The response came fast. Dispatch coordinating search and rescue. Air traffic rerouting other flights. Emergency protocols snapping into place. But Cal barely heard it. His eyes were locked on the empty space where the radar blip had been. He knew this mountain. He knew what happened to aircraft that went down in a blizzard at 4,000 feet. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Cal, wait." It was Jennings, the night supervisor, a heavy-set man with graying hair and a permanent frown. "Search and rescue won't launch until the storm clears, you know that." Cal didn't slow down. "Then someone needs to be ready when it does." "You can't go out there, not in this." Cal stopped, his hand on the door handle, and turned to face Jennings. His expression was calm, but his voice was steel. "I'm not sitting here while someone dies on my watch." Jennings opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd worked with Cal long enough to know there was no point in arguing. At least take the emergency beacon, and check in every 30 minutes. Cal nodded once, then pushed through the door into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Snow whipped sideways, stinging his face and burning his lungs with every breath. He pulled his hood up and started walking, his boots crunching through the knee-deep drifts. The wind screamed in his ears, but Cal's mind was eerily quiet. He'd done this before. Not here, not like this, but the muscle memory was still there, buried under a decade of grief and guilt. He'd been a rescue pilot once, one of the best. He'd flown into hurricanes, wildfires, war zones, places where other pilots wouldn't go. He'd saved lives. He'd been a hero. And then he'd lost everything. The crash had happened on a clear day, which somehow made it worse. No storm, no warning, just a sudden loss of navigation, a spiral into the trees, and the sound of metal tearing apart. Cal had survived with a shattered leg and 3 broken ribs. His wife, Elena, hadn't survived at all. The investigation had been quick. Equipment failure. A defect in the navigation system. No one's fault. The company had settled quietly, paid out a modest sum, and moved on. Cal had taken the money, bought the cabin, and buried himself in the mountains with Maddie. He'd stopped flying, stopped trusting the sky, stopped trusting himself, but he hadn't stopped knowing how to find people in the wreckage. He moved through the storm with the methodical precision of someone who'd trained for exactly this. He listened for the sound of engines, watched for the glow of fire, scanned the tree line for broken branches or displaced snow. The blizzard tried to erase everything, but Cal had learned long ago how to read the mountain's secrets. 20 minutes in, he saw the smoke. It was faint, almost invisible against the swirling white, but it was there, a thin gray column rising from a cluster of pines about a quarter-mile east. Cal adjusted his course and pushed harder, his legs burning as he waded through the drifts. The wind tried to shove him back, but he leaned into it, his focus narrowing to a single point. The wreckage came into view like something out of a nightmare. The helicopter had come down hard, carving a deep gouge through the trees before slamming into a rocky outcrop. The tail section was crumpled, the rotors sheared off and scattered across the snow. The cockpit was on fire, flames licking up through the shattered windshield and melting the ice around it. The whole thing looked like it could explode at any second. Cal didn't hesitate. He ran straight toward it, his mind already calculating angles, fuel load, structural integrity. The heat hit him first, then the smell. Burning fuel, scorched metal, something worse underneath. He reached the cockpit and looked inside. 2 people. The pilot slumped forward, unconscious or dead. And in the passenger seat, a woman with dark hair and a bleeding head wound, her eyes wide and glassy with shock. She saw him and screamed, "The fuel tank! It's going to blow!" Cal ignored her. He grabbed the door handle, hot enough to burn through his glove, and wrenched it open. The woman shrank back, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "I'm getting you out," Cal said, his voice calm and absolute. "Don't fight me." "The pilot. I'll get him next. You first." He reached in, unclipped her harness, and pulled her out of the seat. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp with shock and pain. He slung her over his shoulder and turned away from the wreckage, moving as fast as he could through the snow. Behind him, the fire roared louder, the heat intensifying. He made it 20 feet before the explosion ripped through the night. The blast threw him forward, and he twisted in midair to shield the woman with his body. They hit the snow hard, and Cal felt something crack in his ribs. Pain exploded through his chest, but he didn't let go. He rolled to his feet, still holding her, and kept moving until they were far enough from the flames to breathe. He set her down gently, checking her pulse, her pupils, the wound on her forehead. She was conscious, barely, her eyes unfocused, and her lips moving soundlessly. "Stay with me," Cal said. "What's your name?" She blinked, trying to focus on his face. "Sloan. Sloan, listen to me. You're going to be okay. I need to go back for the pilot." Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "He's dead. I checked. Before the crash. He's gone." Cal looked back at the wreckage, now fully engulfed in flames. If the pilot was dead before impact, there was nothing he could do. And staying here meant they'd both freeze. "Can you walk?" Sloan tried to stand, then collapsed. I can't feel my legs." Cal didn't waste time. He lifted her again, this time cradling her against his chest, and started the long trek back through the storm. The wind had gotten worse, the visibility down to almost nothing. He navigated by memory, by instinct, by the faint glow of the control station lights in the distance. It took 40 minutes to reach the cabin. By the time he kicked the door open, his arms were numb, and his lungs were on fire. He carried Sloan inside, laid her on the couch, and immediately started stripping off her wet clothes. She didn't protest. She was shivering violently, her skin pale and waxy, her eyes half closed. Cal worked fast. He wrapped her in blankets, built up the fire, heated water on the stove. He cleaned the wound on her forehead, deep but not life-threatening, and bandaged it with steady hands. Then he made her drink hot broth, forcing it down even when she turned her head away. "Stay awake," he said. "You've got a concussion. You need to stay awake." Sloane's eyes fluttered open. "Who are you?" "Cal Mercer." "Why did you come into the storm?" Cal didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline crash. "Because no one else would." "That's insane." "Maybe." Sloane studied him through the haze of pain and exhaustion. "You're not just some radar guy, are you?" Cal's expression hardened. "I used to be a pilot. Rescue operations. That was a long time ago." "Why did you stop?" "Because people die when I fly." The words came out flat, final, and Sloane didn't push. She closed her eyes again, her breathing evening out. Cal watched her for a long moment, then stood and walked to the window. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the cabin, it was warm, safe, quiet. Maddie's bedroom door creaked open, and a small voice called out, "Dad?" Cal turned to see his daughter standing in the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit and rubbing her eyes. "Hey, Mads, did I wake you?" Maddie looked past him to the woman on the couch. "Who's that?" "Someone who needed help." "Is she okay?" "She will be." Maddie patted over and leaned against Cal's leg, staring at Sloane with wide, curious eyes. "Is she staying?" "Just for the night, until the storm clears." "Okay." Maddie yawned. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" Cal smiled, the tension in his chest easing just a little. "Yeah, kiddo, pancakes." Maddie nodded, satisfied, and shuffled back to her room. Cal listened until he heard the door close, then returned to the couch. Sloane was asleep now, her breathing steady. He sat down in the armchair across from her and let his head fall back against the cushion. He'd saved her. He'd done the right thing. So why did it feel like he just opened a door he'd spent 10 years trying to keep locked? The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, turning the snow outside into a blinding white expanse. Cal woke stiff and sore, his ribs aching from the explosion. He checked on Sloane first, still asleep, but her color was better, then went to make breakfast. Maddie bounced into the kitchen, already dressed and full of energy. "Is she awake yet?" "Not yet." "Can I meet her?" "When she wakes up." Maddie grabbed a chair and climbed onto it, watching Cal flip pancakes with the intensity of a scientist observing an experiment. "Dad, you saved her life, right?" Cal glanced at his daughter. "I got her out of the wreck, that's all." "That's a lot." He smiled. "Maybe." "Are you going to tell her about Mom?" Cal's hand stilled on the spatula. "Why would I do that?" "Because you always get quiet when you save people, like you're thinking about her." Kids saw too much. Cal turned back to the stove, his throat tight. "Eat your pancakes, Mads." Behind them, Sloane stirred on the couch. Cal heard the rustle of blankets, the sharp intake of breath as she tried to sit up. He set the spatula down and walked over, Maddie trailing behind him. Sloane's eyes were clearer now, but filled with confusion. She looked around the cabin, the worn furniture, the stone fireplace, the photos on the mantel, and then at Cal. "Where am I?" "My cabin, about 2 miles from the crash site." She touched the bandage on her forehead, wincing. "You pulled me out." "Yeah." "And the pilot?" Cal shook his head. Sloane's face crumpled, and she pressed her hands to her eyes. "God, oh God, Marcus, he was supposed to retire next month." Cal didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Maddie, however, had no such filter. She stepped forward and extended her hand solemnly. "Hi, I'm Maddie. You're really pretty, even with the bandage." Sloane blinked, then laughed, a raw, startled sound that was half sob. "Thank you, Maddie. That's very kind. Do you like pancakes?" Yes, I think so." "Good. Dad makes the best pancakes. Come on." Maddie grabbed Sloane's hand and tugged her toward the kitchen. Cal followed, watching as his daughter chattered away, completely unfazed by the fact that they had a half-frozen, traumatized stranger in their house. Sloane moved carefully, favoring her left leg, but she managed to sit at the table without collapsing. Cal set a plate in front of her. Eat, you need the calories. Sloane picked up a fork, then paused. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't need to. You risked your life for me. You didn't even know who I was. Cal poured himself coffee, his back to her. Doesn't matter who you are. You needed help. It matters to me. He turned, meeting her eyes for the first time in full daylight. They were gray, sharp, despite the exhaustion, and there was something in them, intelligence, guilt, grief, that made him look away again. Maddie filled the silence. Dad used to be a pilot, a really good one, but he doesn't fly anymore because Mads. Cal's voice was gentle but firm. That's enough. Maddie looked at him, then at Sloane, then back at her pancakes. Okay. Sloane didn't push. She ate slowly, mechanically, her mind clearly somewhere else. When she finished, she set the fork down and said quietly, I need to make some calls. The company, people will be looking for me. Cal pulled out his phone and handed it to her. Service is spotty, but it should work. She took it, her fingers brushing his for a brief second. Thank you. Cal stepped back, putting distance between them. I'll be outside, clearing the path. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, needing air, needing space. Maddie stayed inside with Sloane, her cheerful chatter a muffled hum through the cabin walls. Outside, the world was blindingly bright. Cal shoveled snow with more force than necessary, his mind racing. He'd seen the helicopter's tail number before the explosion. November 73 Delta. He'd logged it in the radar system, tagged it as a private executive flight, but he hadn't connected it to anything else. Until now. Because now, in the clear light of morning, he remembered where he'd seen that registration before. It belonged to Harker Aviation, the same company that built the helicopter that killed his wife. Sloane made her calls. The first was to her assistant, who answered on the second ring with a panicked, Ms. Harker, oh my God, we've been trying to reach you all night. I'm alive, Jenna. The pilot didn't make it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Marcus is, yes. Sloane's voice cracked. Contact his family. Make sure they have everything they need, and get a team to the crash site as soon as possible. Already in motion, the FAA is involved. They want to talk to you as soon as you're cleared. I know. Are you hurt? I'll survive. Listen, Jenna, I need you to pull the maintenance logs for November 73 Delta. Everything from the last 6 months. Why? Because something went wrong, and I need to know if it was us. There was a pause. Miss Harker, the legal team is going to advise you not to I don't care what they advise. I want those logs on my desk the second I'm back in the city. Understood. Sloane ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the phone in her hands. She was the CEO of Harker Aviation, a company her father had built from nothing and turned into one of the most respected names in the industry. She'd inherited it 5 years ago when he died, and she'd spent every day since trying to prove she was worthy of the legacy. But if the crash was their fault, if something they'd built, something they'd certified as safe, had failed, then everything she'd worked for meant nothing. She looked up as Cal came back inside, snow dusting his shoulders. He kicked off his boots and hung up his coat, not looking at her. Thank you for the phone, Sloane said. Cal nodded. I called my office. They're sending a helicopter to pick me up this afternoon. Good. Sloane hesitated, then said, Can I ask you something? Cal leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. Go ahead. Last night, when you pulled me out, you said you used to be a rescue pilot. What happened? Cal's jaw tightened. I crashed. And? And my wife died. The words hung in the air, cold and final. Sloane felt the weight of them settle over her like a heavy blanket. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. It doesn't sound like it. Cal's eyes flashed, and for a moment Sloane thought he was going to tell her to leave. But then Maddie came running into the room, holding up a drawing of a helicopter with a big red heart on it. Look! I made this for you! Sloane took the drawing, her throat tight. It's beautiful, Maddie. Thank you. Maddie beamed. Dad says you're leaving today. I have to, but I won't forget this. Either of you. Maddie nodded seriously. Good. Because Dad doesn't let just anyone eat pancakes in our house. Sloane laughed despite everything, and for a brief moment the cabin felt warm again. But then the sound of rotor blades echoed across the valley, and the moment shattered. The rescue helicopter landed in the clearing behind the cabin, its rotors kicking up a whirlwind of snow. Two medics jumped out, followed by a man in an expensive suit who looked deeply out of place in the wilderness. "Miss Harker!" The man rushed toward her, his face pale with relief. "Thank God you're alive." Sloane stood, wincing as her leg protested. "I'm fine, David. Mostly." David, her head of legal, glanced at Cal, then back at Sloane. "We need to get you to a hospital, and we need to debrief. The FAA is already asking questions." "I know." The medics approached, but Sloane waved them off. "I can walk." She turned to Cal, who stood in the doorway with Maddie tucked against his side. "I don't know how to repay you." Cal's expression was unreadable. "You don't owe me anything." "I do. You saved my life." "I did what anyone would do." "No," Sloane said quietly. "You did what almost no one would do." She held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and limped toward the helicopter. David helped her into the passenger seat, and the medics began checking her vitals. The engines roared to life, and the helicopter lifted off, snow swirling in its wake. Cal watched until it disappeared over the ridge. Maddie tugged on his sleeve. "Will we see her again?" "I don't know, kiddo. I hope we do. I liked her." Cal ruffled her hair but didn't answer. He went back inside and closed the door, shutting out the cold and the noise and the memory of gray eyes that had looked at him like he was something more than a broken man hiding in the mountains. But later that night, after Maddie was asleep, Cal went down to the basement. He hadn't been down there in years. It was where he kept everything from his old life: flight manuals, gear, photos he couldn't bring himself to look at. And in the back corner, covered in dust, was a box labeled Elena. He opened it with shaking hands. Inside were her things, her flight jacket, her logbook, and at the very bottom, sealed in plastic, were the remnants of the crash investigation, reports, diagrams, and a single scorched circuit board that the FAA had returned to him with a note. Defective component, case closed. Cal pulled out the circuit board and held it up to the light. He'd never looked at it closely before. He'd been too angry, too broken, too lost in grief to care about the technical details. But now, in the quiet of his basement, he saw something he'd missed a decade ago. A manufacturer's stamp. Small, almost invisible, etched into the metal. Harker Aviation. Cal's blood ran cold. He set the board down carefully, his mind racing. Sloane Harker, CEO of Harker Aviation, the woman he'd saved, the woman whose company had built the system that killed his wife. And now she'd crashed in the same mountains, in the same kind of storm, with the same kind of navigation failure. Cal sat down hard on the basement floor, his hands pressed to his face. This wasn't over, not even close. Cal didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the circuit board in front of him, turning it over in his hands like it might reveal secrets if he stared long enough. The manufacturer's stamp glared back at him, small and damning. Harker Aviation. The same company. The same flaw. 10 years apart. It couldn't be a coincidence. By the time dawn broke, Cal had made a decision. He needed answers, and the only person who could give them to him was the woman he'd pulled from the wreckage. Maddie found him still sitting there when she came down for breakfast, her hair sticking up in every direction. She climbed into the chair across from him and studied his face with the unnerving perception of a child who'd learned to read her father's moods before she could read books. "You didn't sleep again," she said. "I'm fine, Mads." "That's what you always say." She reached across the table and patted his hand. "Are you thinking about the helicopter lady?" Cal's jaw tightened. "Her name is Sloane." "Are you thinking about Sloane?" "Yeah." "Because of Mom?" Cal looked at his daughter, at her serious brown eyes and the worried crease between her brows that made her look far older than 8. He'd tried so hard to shield her from his grief, but kids were like water. They found every crack, every weakness, every hidden truth. "Because of a lot of things," he said quietly. "But yeah, because of Mom, too." Maddie nodded like this made perfect sense. "Are you going to go see her?" "Maybe." "Good. You should. She seemed nice. And she needs to know you're not just some guy who lives in the woods. Cal almost smiled. What am I then? A hero. Duh. He did smile then, brief and painful. I'm not a hero, kiddo. You are to me. Maddie hopped off the chair and grabbed the cereal box. And probably to her too, even if she doesn't know it yet. Cal watched his daughter pour cereal with the confidence of someone who just solved all the world's problems, and he felt the weight in his chest shift slightly. Not gone. Never gone. But manageable. Hey, Mads? Yeah? I love you. You know that, right? Maddie rolled her eyes in that way only 8-year-olds could. Obviously, Dad. Now eat something. You look terrible. 3 days later, Cal stood outside the glass tower that housed Harker Aviation's headquarters in downtown Seattle. The building rose 40 stories into the gray sky, all steel and reflective windows, the kind of place that made people like him feel small and out of place. He'd driven 6 hours through the mountains to get here, leaving Maddie with Mrs. Chen from down the road, a retired teacher who loved baking cookies and asking no questions. Cal had the circuit board in his jacket pocket, wrapped carefully in plastic. He'd also brought printed copies of Elena's crash report, highlighted and annotated. He didn't know what he was going to say, didn't know if Sloan would even see him. But he knew he couldn't stay in that cabin with these questions burning a hole through his chest. The lobby was massive, filled with sleek furniture and giant photographs of helicopters in flight. A receptionist sat behind a curved marble desk, looking like she'd been hired specifically to intimidate visitors. Cal approached, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. I'm here to see Sloan Harker. The receptionist barely glanced up. Do you have an appointment? No. Then I'm afraid Ms. Harker isn't available. Tell her Cal Mercer is here. She'll know who I am. The receptionist's fingers paused on her keyboard. She looked at him properly for the first time, her expression shifting from dismissive to uncertain. Please wait here. She picked up the phone and turned away, speaking in a low voice. Cal stood in the middle of the lobby, feeling every set of eyes in the room tracking him. He looked like exactly what he was, a man from the mountains who didn't belong in places like this. The receptionist hung up and turned back to him, her professional mask firmly in place. Ms. Harker will see you, 38th floor. Someone will escort you. A security guard appeared and led Cal to the elevators. They rode in silence, Cal watching the numbers climb, his heart beating harder with each passing floor. When the doors opened, he stepped into a space that was all glass and clean lines, with a view of the city that made him feel like he was standing on the edge of the world. Another assistant, this one younger, sharper, more nervous, met him at the elevator. Mr. Mercer, right this way. She led him down a hallway lined with awards and framed magazine covers. Cal caught glimpses of Sloan in several of them, standing in front of helicopters, shaking hands with politicians, looking composed and confident in a way that felt alien compared to the terrified woman he'd carried through the snow. The assistant stopped at a set of double doors. Ms. Harker is finishing a call. She'll be with you in just a moment. Cal nodded, and the assistant disappeared, leaving him alone in the hallway. He took a breath, then pushed the doors open. The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the furniture was minimal but expensive. A desk that looked like it cost more than Cal's truck, leather chairs, abstract art on the walls. And standing by the window with her back to him was Sloan. She turned when she heard the door, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked different. The bandage was gone, replaced by a thin line of stitches near her hairline. She wore a dark suit, her hair pulled back, her expression guarded, professional, untouchable. But when their eyes met, something in her face softened. Cal, she said quietly, I wasn't sure you'd come. You knew I would. I hoped. She gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. Cal stayed standing. This isn't a social visit. Sloane's expression shifted, caution replacing warmth. What is it then? Cal pulled the circuit board from his pocket and set it on her desk. This. Sloane stared at it, her face going pale. Where did you get that? From my wife's crash, 10 years ago. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Sloane picked up the circuit board with shaking hands, turning it over, her eyes finding the manufacturer's stamp. When she looked back at Cal, her voice was barely a whisper. This is one of ours. Yeah, it is. Cal, I don't understand. Your wife, her name was Elena. She was a pilot, medevac. She crashed on a clear day because her navigation system failed. Cal's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched at his sides. The investigation called it a defect. Case closed. No one was held accountable, and I buried her and spent the last 10 years trying to forget. Sloan set the circuit board down like it was radioactive. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Why would you? You weren't running the company then. Your father was. Cal stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. But you're running it now. And 3 nights ago, your helicopter went down in the same mountains, in the same kind of storm, with the same kind of navigation failure. Sloane's breath caught. You think it's connected? I know it is. Cal, that's... She stopped, her mind clearly racing. The investigation into my crash is still ongoing. We don't have conclusions yet. Then get them. It's not that simple. There are protocols, regulations, multiple agencies involved. I don't care about protocols. Cal's voice was sharp now, all the anger he'd buried for a decade rising to the surface. I care about the fact that your company built a system that killed my wife, and 10 years later, it almost killed you too. How many other people have died because of this? How many crashes have been written off as pilot error or bad weather when the real problem was sitting right there in the cockpit? Sloane's face was ashen. I don't know. Then find out. She stared at him, and he saw the moment she made her decision. She reached for her phone and pressed a button. Jenna, cancel my afternoon meetings and get me David Chen and the head of engineering, my office, now. She hung up and looked back at Cal. If what you're saying is true, if there's a systemic problem with our navigation systems, then we need to know, and we need to fix it. And if there's a cover-up, Sloane's eyes flashed, then I'll burn it down myself. 20 minutes later, Cal sat in a conference room that felt like a war room. Sloane was at the head of the table, flanked by David Chen, the lawyer Cal had seen at the cabin, and a thin, nervous man introduced as Dr. Marcus Webb, head of engineering. 2 other people sat further down the table, taking notes and avoiding eye contact. Sloane had laid out the circuit board in the center of the table like evidence at a trial. Dr. Webb, I need you to tell me everything about this component. Webb picked it up, examined it, and his face went tight. This is from our Gen 2 navigation module. We phased these out 8 years ago. Why? Because we moved to a more advanced system. The Gen 2 was reliable, but the Gen 3 offered better integration with... That's not what I asked. Sloane's voice was ice. I asked why we phased them out. Was there a problem? Webb hesitated. There were some reports of intermittent signal loss in extreme weather conditions. Nothing consistent. We addressed it in the Gen 3 design. Cal leaned forward. Define some reports. Webb glanced at Sloane, who nodded. He pulled out a tablet and scrolled through files. 17 documented incidents over a 6-year period. Most were minor. A few required emergency landings. No fatalities. Except there were fatalities. Cal's voice was deadly calm. My wife. And probably others that got buried in the paperwork. Webb's face went red. I wasn't with the company then. I can't speak to... Then find someone who can. Sloane's tone left no room for argument. I want every crash report involving our navigation systems from the last 15 years. And I want the internal memos, the engineering notes, the emails, everything. If there was a known issue and it was ignored, I need to know. David Chen cleared his throat. Ms. Harker, I have to advise you that opening this investigation could expose the company to significant liability. I don't care. The board will care. The shareholders will care. If we find evidence of negligence, then we find it. Sloane's eyes were blazing now. And we take responsibility. That's what my father would have done. Chen looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded instead. I'll get the legal team started on document collection. Sloane turned back to Webb. What about the helicopter I was in? November to 7-3 Delta. What system was it running? Webb's fingers flew across his tablet. Gen 4. Our most current model. It's been in service for 2 years with 0 reported issues. Until now. Yes. Until now. Sloane stood pacing to the window. So we have two crashes, 10 years apart, both involving navigation failure and extreme weather. One with a Gen 2 system, one with a Gen 4. What's the common thread? Webb frowned. There shouldn't be one. The systems are completely different architectures. But they're both yours, Cal said. Both designed by this company, both certified as safe. Webb bristled. Our systems undergo rigorous testing. We meet every FAA standard. Standards aren't enough if people are dying. The room went silent. Webb looked at Sloan, who was staring out at the city, her shoulders tense. Dr. Webb, she said quietly, I want you to personally review both crashes. Compare the failures. Find the pattern. And I want your report in 72 hours. Ms. Harker, that's not enough time to then work faster and pull whoever you need from other projects. This is priority one. Webb gathered his things and left, his face grim. David Chen followed, still muttering about liability. The other staff members filtered out until it was just Cal and Sloan in the conference room. Sloan turned to face him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. I didn't know. About your wife. About any of this. Would it have mattered if you did? Yes. Her voice was fierce. Of course it would have mattered. Cal stood, picking up the circuit board. This isn't about blame, Sloan. Not entirely. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. I know. She crossed her arms, hugging herself. Cal, if we find something, if there was negligence, a cover-up, it's going to destroy this company. Everything my father built. Everything I've tried to protect. Then maybe it should be destroyed. Sloan flinched like he'd struck her. That's easy for you to say. You don't have 2,000 employees depending on you for their livelihoods. You don't have families who've worked here for generations. You're right, I don't. Cal's voice softened. But I do know what it's like to live with a lie. And I know that truth is the only thing that can set you free, even if it burns everything else down first. Sloan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Stay in Seattle. Please. I might need you when the report comes back. I can't. I have a daughter. Bring her. I'll put you up in a hotel, whatever you need. Cal hesitated. The smart thing would be to go home, to let Sloan handle this, to protect Maddie from the ugliness that was about to unfold. But something in Sloan's expression stopped him. A vulnerability, a fear, a desperate need not to face this alone. 3 days, he said. That's all I can give you. That's all I'm asking. Cal called Mrs. Chen from the hotel room that night and explained that he'd need her to watch Maddie for a few more days. Mrs. Chen, bless her, asked no questions and simply said, Take all the time you need, dear. We're baking cookies tomorrow anyway. Then he called Maddie, and her voice burst through the phone like sunshine. Dad, are you coming home yet? Not yet, kiddo. I need to take care of something. Is it about Sloan? Cal smiled despite himself. Yeah, it is. Is she in trouble? Sort of. She's trying to fix something that's been broken for a long time. And you're helping her? I'm trying. Maddie was quiet for a moment. That's good, Dad. Mom would want you to help. Cal's throat tightened. Yeah, she would. Be safe, okay? And come home soon. Mrs. Chen's cookies are good, but they're not pancakes. I'll be home soon, I promise. He hung up and sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the city lights outside the window. Seattle felt like a different planet compared to the mountains. Too bright, too loud, too full of people who didn't know each other's names. But somewhere out there, Sloan was digging through a decade of buried secrets, and Cal had to believe it would lead somewhere. It had to. The next morning, Sloan called him. We need to talk. Not at the office. Can you meet me? She gave him an address in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city, a small park with a view of the water. Cal found her sitting on a bench, dressed in jeans and a sweater, looking more human than he'd seen her since the crash. She had a coffee in each hand and offered him one as he sat down. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Haven't slept properly in 3 days. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes on the horizon. Dr. Webb sent me a preliminary report last night. Cal, it's worse than we thought. Cal's chest tightened. How much worse? There's a pattern, not just in the Gen 2 and Gen 4 systems, in the Gen 3 too. All three generations share a base code, a foundational algorithm that's been part of our navigation architecture since the beginning. And that code has a flaw. What kind of flaw? It's a fail-safe protocol designed to kick in during extreme weather. It's supposed to stabilize the system by prioritizing certain data inputs. But in rare conditions, severe electromagnetic interference combined with rapid altitude changes, the protocol inverts. Instead of stabilizing, it amplifies the interference. The system essentially blinds itself. Cal felt the blood drain from his face. How rare? Rare enough that it went undetected for years, but not rare enough to be irrelevant. Webb estimates it could have contributed to at least 24 crashes over the past 15 years. 24. Cal's mind reeled. And no one caught this? Sloane's hands were shaking around her coffee cup. They did, or at least someone suspected. Webb found an internal memo from 12 years ago, one of our senior engineers flagging the algorithm for review, but the memo was never acted on. It disappeared into the bureaucracy. Or it was buried. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Sloane's voice cracked. My father was CEO then. If he knew about this, if he made the call to ignore it, then he killed my wife, Cal said flatly. Sloane turned to him, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. God, Cal, I'm so sorry. Cal wanted to be angry. He wanted to rage, to blame, to let all the grief and fury he'd been carrying for 10 years explode. But looking at Sloane, at this woman who'd inherited a legacy built on lies, who was choosing to tear it apart rather than hide behind it, he found he couldn't. It's not your fault, he said quietly. It's my company, my responsibility. You didn't know. I should have. I should have been asking these questions years ago. Cal set his coffee down and turned to face her fully. Sloane, listen to me. You can't change the past. None of us can. But you can make sure this never happens again. That's what matters now. Sloane wiped her eyes, her jaw setting with determination. I'm grounding the fleet, every helicopter with our navigation systems, all three generations, until we can push a software patch and verify it's safe. How many aircraft is that? Nearly 800 in commercial operation, another 200 private and government contracts. It's going to cost millions, maybe more, and the board is going to fight me. Let them. I could lose the company. Then lose it. Cal's voice was fierce. But don't lose yourself. Don't become the kind of person who values money over lives. Sloane met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared grief, a fragile trust built in the space between disaster and redemption. I need you to testify. When the FAA investigation comes, when the lawsuits start, I need you to tell Elena's story. Cal's stomach churned. I don't know if I can. You can, because you're the only one who can make people understand what this really cost. He thought of Elena, of Maddie, of all the families who'd lost someone because of a flaw that should have been fixed years ago. Okay, I'll do it. Sloane reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water. Two people who'd been broken by the same tragedy now standing together in the wreckage, trying to build something better from the pieces. And for the first time in 10 years, Cal felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. The announcement went out the next day. Sloane held a press conference, standing in front of a wall of cameras, and did something almost no CEO ever did. She told the truth. She explained the flaw. She took responsibility. She announced the fleet grounding, the software fix, the independent safety review. And then she did something that made headlines around the world. She apologized. To every family who lost someone because of our failure. To every pilot who trusted our systems. To every person who believed we put safety first. I'm sorry, we let you down, and we're going to spend however long it takes to make this right. Cal watched from the back of the room, Maddie beside him. She'd insisted on coming, on seeing this through, and Cal hadn't had the heart to say no. Maddie squeezed his hand as Sloane spoke, and he squeezed back. The reporters erupted with questions. The stock price plummeted. The board called an emergency meeting. But Sloane stood her ground, answering every question with brutal honesty, refusing to hide behind lawyers or corporate speak. Afterward, in the quiet of her office, she collapsed into her chair and looked at Cal with exhausted eyes. "That's it then. I just destroyed everything my father built." "No," Cal said. "You saved it. You saved what it should have been all along." Maddie nodded seriously. "My dad's right. You're really brave." Sloane smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Maddie. That means more than you know." But the moment of peace didn't last long. Because that night, as Cal was putting Maddie to bed in their hotel room, his phone rang. It was Sloane, and her voice was tight with panic. "Cal, we have a problem. Another distress call just came in. A test pilot went down in the same mountain range where you found me, same storm conditions, same navigation failure, and no one will fly in to get him." Cal's blood turned to ice. "When?" 20 minutes ago. Search and rescue says it's too dangerous. The storm's even worse than the night you saved me." Cal looked at Maddie, already half asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He thought of Elena, of all the people he couldn't save, of the man out there right now, bleeding in the snow, waiting for help that might never come. "I'll go," he said. "Cal, you said you don't fly anymore." "I don't. But I know those mountains, and I'm not letting someone else die because I'm too afraid to try." There was a long pause. Then Sloane said, "I'm coming with you." "That's insane." "So is flying into a blizzard. If you're doing this, I'm doing it with you. That pilot is out there because of my company, because of my failure. I'm not sitting in this office while you risk your life to fix it." Cal wanted to argue, but he heard the steel in her voice and knew it would be pointless. "Fine. Meet me at the airfield in 30 minutes, and bring cold weather gear." He hung up and looked at Maddie, who was watching him with wide, knowing eyes. "You have to go, don't you?" she said quietly. "Yeah, kiddo, I do." "Are you scared?" Terrified. Maddie sat up and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "Be like Mom. She was never scared of anything." Cal's eyes burned. "She was scared all the time, Mads. She just didn't let it stop her." "Then don't let it stop you either." Cal held his daughter close, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and the warmth of her small body, storing it up like armor against what was coming. Then he called Mrs. Chen, explained the situation, and waited for her to arrive. 20 minutes later, he kissed Maddie goodbye and walked out into the Seattle rain, heading toward the mountains and the storm and the man who needed saving. And toward Sloane, who was waiting for him with a helicopter and a choice neither of them could take back. The airfield was a small private facility on the outskirts of Seattle, the kind of place where wealthy people kept their personal aircraft and asked no questions about midnight flights. Cal pulled into the lot and saw Sloane standing beside a helicopter, her hair whipping in the wind, a heavy coat already zipped to her chin. A man in coveralls was doing a pre-flight check, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Cal got out of his truck and walked toward her, his stomach tight with a familiar dread. He hadn't been inside a cockpit in 10 years, hadn't touched the controls, hadn't felt the sight slick under his palm, hadn't trusted himself with anyone's life, including his own. But the moment he saw the helicopter, muscle memory kicked in. His hands knew what to do, even if his mind was screaming at him to turn around. Sloane met him halfway, her face pale but determined. "This is Marcus. Different Marcus, not the pilot who died. He's our best mechanic. He's made sure this bird is perfect." Marcus nodded at Cal, his expression grim. "She's got a full tank, emergency supplies in the back, and I've triple-checked every system. But I'm not going to lie to you. Flying into that storm is suicide." "Then it's a good thing I've got nothing left to lose," Cal said flatly. Marcus glanced at Sloane, who gave him a tight nod. He stepped back, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Good luck. You're going to need it." Cal walked around the helicopter, running his hands along the fuselage, checking the rotors, the tail assembly, the landing gear. It was a newer model than anything he'd flown before, sleek and powerful, with navigation systems that probably cost more than his entire cabin. He opened the cockpit door and climbed in, his heart hammering against his ribs. The controls were familiar and foreign all at once. The cyclic, the collective, the pedals. His hands found them automatically, settling into position like he'd never left. But his chest was tight, his breathing shallow, and when he closed his eyes, he saw Elena's helicopter spiraling into the trees, heard the sound of metal tearing, felt the helplessness that had nearly destroyed him. Cal! He opened his eyes. Sloane was standing beside the cockpit, her hand on the door frame. If you can't do this, tell me now. I'll find another way. Cal looked at her, at the guilt and determination etched into her face, and he thought about the pilot out there in the storm, someone's husband or father or son, bleeding and alone, waiting for a rescue that might never come. He thought about Elena, who'd flown into danger without hesitation because someone needed help, and he thought about Maddie's words, "Don't let it stop you." "I can do this," he said, "but you're not coming with me." Sloane climbed into the co-pilot seat and strapped herself in. "We already had this argument. Sloane, that pilot is out there because my company failed him. Because I failed him. I'm not sitting safe on the ground while you risk everything to fix my mistake." Cal wanted to fight her, to drag her out of the seat and lock her in Marcus's office until this was over. But he saw the same stubbornness in her eyes that he'd seen in Elena's, the same refusal to let fear dictate her choices. So he stopped arguing and started the pre-flight sequence instead. The rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, the familiar thrum vibrating through the frame. Cal ran through the checklist by rote, his hands moving with a precision he didn't know he still possessed. Beside him, Sloane was silent, watching the instruments, her jaw set. Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "You're clear for takeoff. Last known coordinates for the downed pilot are locked into your navigation system. But Cal, listen to me. The storm's moving fast. You've got maybe a 2-hour window before it gets too dangerous to even attempt extraction. After that, you're stuck out there too." "Understood," Cal said. "And one more thing. The test pilot. His name is Ryan Voss. He's 28 years old, just got engaged last month. His fiancée is on her way to the hospital right now, waiting for news." Cal's hands tightened on the controls. 28, the same age Elena had been. "We'll bring him home. I know you will. Good luck." Cal pulled up on the collective and the helicopter lifted off the ground. The moment they were airborne, something inside him shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it receded, pushed back by a decade of training and instinct. He'd been born to fly. Even after everything, he still knew how to do this. They climbed into the night sky, leaving the lights of Seattle behind. Below them, the terrain shifted from city to forest to mountains, the peaks rising like jagged teeth against the darkness. The storm was visible on the horizon, a massive wall of swirling gray and white, lit from within by flashes of lightning. Sloane stared at it, her face tight. "That's what we're flying into?" "That's what we're flying into." "How bad is it going to be?" Cal didn't sugarcoat it. "Bad. The winds will try to throw us into the mountains. Visibility will drop to 0. Ice will form on the rotors and make the aircraft heavier, harder to control. And if the navigation system fails, we crash," Sloane finished quietly. "We crash." She was silent for a moment, then reached over and checked her harness, pulling it tighter. "Then we better make sure it doesn't fail." Cal almost smiled. "You sound like a pilot." "My father made me get my license when I was 20. He said if I was going to run an aviation company, I needed to understand what it felt like to be in the air." Her voice softened. "I haven't flown in years. Not since he died." "Why not?" "Because I was too busy running the company, too busy trying to prove I was good enough to carry his legacy." She laughed bitterly. "And now I find out his legacy was built on covering up a flaw that killed people." Cal glanced at her. "Your father didn't build the company alone. There were engineers, executives, board members. They all made choices. They all share the blame. But he was in charge. He set the tone. And if he chose profits over safety, if he chose to bury that memo instead of acting on it, then everything I believed about him is a lie." Cal didn't have an answer for that. He focused on flying instead, adjusting their course as they approached the storm. The first gusts of wind hit the helicopter, rocking it sideways. Sloane gripped the armrest, her knuckles white. "Talk to me about the navigation system," Cal said. "What's it telling us?" Sloane forced herself to look at the instruments, her voice steadying as she focused on the data. "We're on course. Coordinates locked. Distance to target is 32 miles. Weather radar? Heavy precipitation ahead, wind shear warnings, icing conditions above 3,000 feet. Then we stay below 3,000. The storm swallowed them whole.
One moment they were flying through clear air, and the next they were inside a wall of wind and snow so thick that Cal couldn't see past the cockpit windows. The helicopter bucked and shuddered, the frame groaning under the strain. Ice began forming on the windshield, spreading in jagged patterns that obscured what little visibility they had left. Cal flew by instruments, his eyes locked on the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, the artificial horizon. Every muscle in his body was tense, his mind calculating angles and adjustments faster than conscious thought. Beside him, Sloane called out readings, her voice tight but controlled. Altitude 2,800 feet, airspeed dropping, wind gusts up to 50 knots.
I see it. The helicopter dropped suddenly, caught in a downdraft. Cal corrected, pulling up hard, but another gust slammed them sideways. The rotor blades screamed, struggling to find purchase in the turbulent air. Cal, the ice... I know. Ice was accumulating on the rotors, adding weight and throwing off the balance. The helicopter was becoming sluggish, unresponsive, like flying a truck instead of an aircraft. Cal pushed the engines harder, compensating for the extra load, but he knew they couldn't sustain this for long. How far to the target? He asked. Sloane checked the navigation system, then her face went white. Cal, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? The navigation system. It's glitching. The coordinates are jumping. We're supposed to be 15 miles out, but it's reading 23, then 12, then... She hit the screen. It's not stable. Cal's blood ran cold. The same flaw. The same electromagnetic interference combined with rapid altitude changes. The algorithm was inverting, just like Dr. Webb had described. Can you switch to manual navigation? I don't know the terrain well enough. Do you? Cal did. He'd memorized these mountains after Elena's crash, studying every ridge and valley like a man looking for answers in topography. But flying blind in a storm with faulty instruments was suicide. We're too far in to turn back now, he said. We keep going. You stay on the navigation system even if it's unreliable. Call out anything that looks like a solid reading. I'll navigate by terrain recognition and dead reckoning. Dead reckoning? Cal, that's insane. It's all we've got. Another massive gust hit them, and this time the helicopter spun, a full 360 rotation that sent Sloane's stomach into her throat. Cal fought the controls, his hands moving in precise, desperate motions, bringing them back under control. But the strain was showing. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold, and his breathing was harsh and ragged. Cal, maybe we should turn back, find another way. There is no other way. That pilot has 2 hours at most. We're already 40 minutes in. Sloane looked at him, at the determination carved into his features, and she understood. This wasn't just about Ryan Voss. This was about every person Cal hadn't been able to save, every life lost to a flaw that should have been fixed, every ghost that haunted him in the dark. This was his chance at redemption. So she stopped arguing and focused on the instruments, calling out every scrap of useful data she could find. Altitude 2,600, airspeed 30 knots, heading's drifting, we're off course. Cal adjusted, banking hard to the left. Through a brief break in the snow, he caught a glimpse of a familiar rock formation, a massive granite outcrop shaped like a broken tooth. He knew that landmark. It meant they were close. 5 miles, he said. Maybe less. The navigation system is showing target proximity, but it's flickering. Ignore it. Trust me. Sloane did. She stopped watching the instruments and started watching Cal instead, seeing the focus in his eyes, the way his hands moved with absolute certainty even when everything around them was chaos. This was who he'd been before the crash took it all away. A pilot who flew into impossible situations and brought people home. A hero, whether he believed it or not. The helicopter dropped again, this time so sharply that Sloane's harness cut into her shoulders. Cal brought them level, but the engines were screaming now, pushed beyond their limits. Come on, he muttered. Come on, hold together. And then through the swirling white, Sloane saw it. There, 12 o'clock. Is that? Cal saw it too. A faint orange glow barely visible through the storm. A flare. That's him. He pushed the helicopter toward the light, descending carefully, searching for a place to land. But the terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, scattered boulders, trees bent nearly horizontal by the wind. There was nowhere flat enough, nowhere safe enough. I can't land, Cal said. The ground's too unstable. We'll have to do a hover extraction. In this wind? In this wind. He brought the helicopter to a hover about 15 feet off the ground, fighting to keep it steady while the storm tried to knock them out of the sky. Below, they could see the wreckage of Ryan Voss's helicopter, a twisted mess of metal embedded in a snowbank. And beside it, a figure waving frantically, his face illuminated by the dying flare. I'm going down, Sloane said, unbuckling her harness. What? No. You need to keep us stable. I'm lighter. I can get to him faster. She was already moving, pulling a rescue harness from the emergency supplies. Clip me in and lower me down. Well, Cal wanted to argue, but she was right. He couldn't leave the controls, and they didn't have time for a debate. You get him into the harness and signal when you're ready to come up. Do not try to be a hero. Look who's talking. Cal almost smiled. He clipped the rescue line to Sloane's harness, double-checked the connections, then nodded. Go. Sloane opened the side door and the wind nearly ripped her out of the helicopter. She grabbed the rescue line and started descending, her feet finding purchase on the swinging rope. The storm battered her from all sides, spinning her, soaking her, stealing her breath. But she kept moving, hand over hand, until her feet touched the ground. She stumbled through the snow toward Ryan Voss. He was young, barely more than a kid, with blood matting his hair and one leg bent at a wrong angle. His eyes were glassy with shock and pain, but when he saw her, something like hope flickered across his face. You came, he gasped. Of course we came. Sloane pulled the second harness from her shoulder and started strapping it around him. What's your name? Ryan. Ryan Voss. Ryan, I'm Sloane. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that? My leg. I can't feel my leg. We'll deal with that at the hospital. Right now, I just need you to hold on. She finished securing the harness and signaled to Cal. The line went taut, and Ryan started to rise. Sloane guided him, keeping his broken leg from catching on debris, shouting encouragement over the howl of the wind. When he was halfway up, she grabbed her own line and started climbing. That's when she heard the crack. It was a sound she'd never forget, sharp and final, like the world breaking in half. She looked up and saw the rotor assembly shedding ice in massive chunks. One piece struck the tail rotor, and the helicopter lurched violently to the side. In the cockpit, warning lights erupted across Cal's panel. The tail rotor was damaged, maybe destroyed, and the helicopter was starting to spin. He fought the controls, every instinct screaming at him to abandon ship, but he couldn't. Ryan was only halfway to safety, and Sloane was still on the ground. Cal! Sloane's voice cut through the radio, panicked. What's happening? Tail rotor's failing! Get Ryan inside, now! Sloane pulled herself up the line faster, her arms screaming with effort. Above her, Ryan had reached the door, and hands were pulling him inside. She was 10 feet away when the helicopter spun again, the line swinging wildly. She lost her grip and fell, slamming into the snow hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Cal saw her fall and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He descended, bringing the dying helicopter closer to the ground, the tail rotor screaming as it tore itself apart. 5 feet, 3 feet. Close enough. Sloane, grab the line! She staggered to her feet, dizzy and gasping, and lunged for the rope. Her fingers closed around it just as the helicopter started to climb. Cal pulled up hard, ignoring the warnings, ignoring the smoke pouring from the tail assembly, ignoring everything except the need to get them out of there. They were 50 feet off the ground when the tail rotor gave up completely. The helicopter spun like a top, the main rotors fighting to keep them airborne. Cal had seconds to make a choice. He could try to climb, try to clear the ridge and hope they could glide to a safe landing on the other side. Or he could crash here, controlled, in the snow where at least they'd have a chance of surviving. Below him, Sloane was still dangling from the line, spinning helplessly. Cal made his choice. He cut the engines and aimed for the deepest snowdrift he could see. Brace for impact. The helicopter hit hard. The landing gear crumpled, the windshield shattered, and the frame groaned as it collapsed in on itself. Cal felt his head slam into something solid, felt pain explode through his skull, felt the world go dark. Then nothing. When Sloane opened her eyes, she was buried in snow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't see. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down and started digging, clawing her way toward the light. Her hands broke through the surface, and she dragged herself out, gasping and shaking. The helicopter was a wreck. The main body had held together, but it was tilted at a crazy angle, half buried in the drift. Smoke poured from the engine compartment, and the smell of fuel was sharp in the air. "Cal!" Sloane stumbled toward the cockpit, her legs screaming with pain she didn't have time to process. "Cal, answer me!" She wrenched the door open. Cal was slumped over the controls, blood running down his face, his eyes closed. For one terrible moment, Sloane thought he was dead. Then she saw his chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered, unbuckling his harness with shaking hands. "Not after everything, not now." She checked the back. Ryan was unconscious but breathing, strapped into his seat with the rescue crew's blanket wrapped around him. They were alive. All three of them. Against all odds, they were alive. But the storm wasn't done with them yet. The wind picked up, colder and more vicious than before. Sloane knew they couldn't stay in the helicopter. The fuel smell was too strong, the risk of fire too high. She had to move them, had to get them somewhere sheltered. She grabbed the emergency kit and a flare gun, then started the brutal work of dragging Cal out of the cockpit. He was heavy, dead weight, and every movement sent pain shooting through her injured leg. But she didn't stop. She got him clear of the wreckage, then went back for Ryan. By the time she'd pulled them both 20 yards away to a cluster of rocks that offered minimal shelter, she was gasping and dizzy. She fired the flare gun into the sky, watching the bright red light arc through the storm. Someone would see it. Someone had to see it. She collapsed beside Cal, pressing her fingers to his neck to feel his pulse. It was there, weak but steady. She brushed the blood from his face, her hands gentle despite their shaking. "You saved him," she said softly. "You saved both of us. Just like you saved me that first night." Cal's eyes flickered open, unfocused and confused. "Sloane? I'm here. We're okay. Ryan's okay. You did it. Elena," he mumbled. "I saw her. In the cockpit. She was smiling." Sloane's throat tightened. "She's proud of you. I know she is." "Couldn't save her. Tried. Couldn't. But you saved us. You saved Ryan. You saved me twice now. That has to count for something." Cal's hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "Don't leave me out here." Sloane squeezed back, fierce and absolute. "I won't. I promise. We're in this together." His eyes closed again, and Sloane held his hand in the darkness, listening to the storm rage around them, and prayed that someone would find them before the cold did what the crash couldn't. Above them, the sky was an endless howl of white. But somewhere beyond it, lights were moving. Search helicopters, finally brave enough to launch now that the worst of the storm had passed. They'd seen the flare. They were coming. Sloane wrapped herself around Cal, sharing what little warmth she had left, and waited for rescue. For dawn. For whatever came next. And as the minutes stretched into an hour, as Ryan stirred and moaned beside them, as the cold crept deeper into her bones, Sloane made a promise to herself. If they survived this, when they survived this, she would make sure Cal's sacrifice meant something. She would fix the company, face the lawsuits, tell the truth no matter how much it hurt. She would make sure Elena Mercer's death and every death after it hadn't been in vain. She owed Cal that much. She owed them all that much. The sound of rotors cut through the storm, real ones this time, not hallucinations. Lights appeared on the horizon, sweeping across the snow. Sloane fired another flare, and the lights changed course, heading straight for them. "They're here," she whispered to Cal. "Help is here. You can rest now." Cal's lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear, but she knew what he was saying, because she felt it too. "We made it." The rescue helicopter landed, and medics poured out, moving with practiced efficiency. They loaded Ryan first, stabilizing his leg, wrapping him in thermal blankets. Then they came for Cal, immobilizing his neck, checking his vitals, speaking to him in calm, steady voices. Sloane refused treatment until they were all aboard. Only when the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the wreckage and the storm and the mountain that had tried to kill them, did she finally let herself believe it was over. She sat beside Cal as the medics worked on him, holding his hand, watching his face. He was pale and battered, but he was breathing. He was alive. They all were. And as Seattle's lights appeared in the distance, as the helicopter descended toward the hospital where Maddie and Mrs. Chen and Ryan's fiancé were all waiting, Sloane felt something shift inside her. She'd walked into that storm expecting to die, expecting it to be her penance for the sins of her company, for the failures she'd inherited. But Cal had refused to let her go. He'd crashed his helicopter to save her, given up his chance of escape to make sure she made it out. No one had ever done that for her before. No one had ever chosen her survival over their own. She looked at him now, at this quiet, broken man who'd become a hero twice over, and she understood something fundamental. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But whatever came next, the investigations, the testimony, the rebuilding, they'd face it together. Because Cal Mercer had saved her life. And Sloane Harker was going to make damn sure it was worth saving. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear. Sloane sat in a plastic chair outside the ICU, her leg wrapped in a compression bandage, her body aching in places she didn't know could hurt. She'd refused admission, refused pain medication beyond the bare minimum, refused to leave until she knew Cal was going to make it. The doctors had tried to insist, but one look at her face and they'd back down. Maddie sat beside her, small and silent, her stuffed rabbit clutched so tightly that the fabric was starting to tear. Mrs. Chen had brought her to the hospital the moment the news broke, and the little girl hadn't said a word since seeing her father wheeled past on a gurney, his face pale and still beneath the oxygen mask. Sloane reached over and took Maddie's hand. "He's going to be okay." Maddie's voice was tiny. "You don't know that." "I do. Your dad is the strongest person I've ever met. He survived the crash. He survived the storm. He's going to survive this too." "Mom didn't survive." The words hit Sloane like a punch to the chest. She turned to look at Maddie, at this 8-year-old girl who'd already lost one parent and was now terrified of losing the other, and she felt her heart crack open. "You're right. Your mom didn't survive, and that's the worst thing that ever happened to you and to your dad. But Maddie, listen to me. Your dad fought so hard to come back to you. He flew into that storm because he couldn't stand the thought of someone else's family feeling the way you felt when your mom died. He's a hero, and heroes don't give up." "He says he's not a hero." "He's wrong." Maddie looked at her with eyes far too old for her face. "Are you going to leave when he gets better, like everyone else does?" Sloane's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "People are nice to us for a while. They bring casseroles and say they're sorry about Mom, but then they go away. Dad says it's okay, that people have their own lives. But I think he's lonely. I think he misses having someone who stays." Sloane didn't know what to say to that. She barely knew this child, barely knew Cal beyond the intensity of 2 life-or-death situations. But something had shifted between them in that storm, something deep and fundamental that couldn't be explained away as gratitude or trauma bonding. Cal had risked everything to save her, and she'd stayed by his side when the helicopter went down. They'd chosen each other in the moments that mattered most. "I'm not going anywhere," Sloane said quietly. "Not until your dad tells me to leave. And maybe not even then." Maddie studied her face, searching for the truth beneath the words. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded and leaned against Sloane's shoulder. They sat like that, waiting, as the minutes stretched into hours. Ryan Voss's fiancée had come and gone, crying with relief when the doctors confirmed he'd survive. His leg would need surgery, months of physical therapy, but he'd walk again. He'd fly again if he wanted to. He had a future because Cal had refused to let him die alone on that mountain, but Cal himself remained in surgery. Skull fracture, the doctors had said. Swelling on the brain, 3 broken ribs, internal bruising, possible damage to his spine. They were doing everything they could, but the next 24 hours would be critical. Sloane had called Jenna from the hospital, her voice hoarse and raw. "Cancel everything. Board meetings, press conferences, all of it. I'm not leaving until I know he's okay." "Ms. Harker, the board is demanding answers. The media is camped outside headquarters. We're hemorrhaging stock value by the hour. I don't care. The FAA wants your statement about the crash. They're saying pilot error might have contributed. It wasn't pilot error." Sloane's voice turned to ice. "Cal Mercer is the best pilot I've ever seen. He kept that helicopter in the air when any other pilot would have crashed in the first 10 minutes. He saved 3 lives, including mine. Again. And if anyone tries to blame him for this, I will personally destroy them. Are we clear? There was a pause. Crystal clear, Ms. Harker. Good. Now get me Dr. Webb. I want the navigation system from that helicopter recovered and analyzed. I want to know exactly what failed and when. And I want it on record that we're taking full responsibility for the equipment malfunction. That's going to open us up to massive liability. Then we deal with it. Do what I'm asking, Jenna. Sloane had hung up and returned to Maddie's side, her hands shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. She'd meant every word. If the company had to burn to clear Cal's name, to honor Elena's memory, to make sure this never happened again, then so be it. A doctor emerged from the surgical wing, still in her scrubs, her face tired but cautiously optimistic. Sloane stood immediately, Maddie scrambling up beside her. How is he? Sloane asked. Stable. The surgery went well. We've relieved the pressure on his brain and the scans look better than we'd hoped, but he's not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours are critical for monitoring brain function and watching for complications. Can we see him? The doctor hesitated. He's unconscious. He probably will be for at least another 12 hours, maybe longer. But yes, you can see him. Family only, though. I'm his daughter, Maddie said immediately. The doctor's expression softened. Of course, sweetheart. Come with me. She led them through a maze of corridors to a private room where Cal lay motionless in the bed, his head wrapped in bandages, tubes, and wires connecting him to half a dozen machines. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the mountain in the storm had taken something essential from him. Maddie climbed into the chair beside the bed and took her father's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his larger ones. Hi, Dad. It's me. I'm here. You have to wake up soon, okay? Because Mrs. Chen said we can't keep staying with her forever, and I don't know how to make pancakes by myself yet. Sloane stood at the foot of the bed, her vision blurring. She'd been in hospitals before, visiting her father during his final illness, checking on injured employees after accidents. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that terrified her. She'd only known Cal for a week. 1 week. And yet standing here watching him fight for his life felt like losing something irreplaceable. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway with coffee and sandwiches that neither Sloane nor Maddie could eat. You should go home, dear, she said gently to Sloane. Get some rest. I'll stay with Maddie. I'm not leaving. Mrs. Chen didn't argue. She settled into another chair and pulled out her knitting, the click of needles a soothing rhythm in the sterile room. The hours blurred together. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, speaking in low voices about neural responses and cranial pressure. Sloane stayed glued to her chair, watching Cal's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, willing him to open his eyes. Maddie fell asleep curled up in her chair, her hand still holding her father's. Mrs. Chen draped a blanket over her and whispered to Sloane, That child has been through more than any 8-year-old should. She's stronger than she looks. She's like her father, Sloane said quietly, and her mother. Elena was a force of nature, stubborn, brave, absolutely devoted to her family. Cal was never the same after losing her. Sloane looked at Mrs. Chen. Did you know her well? Well enough. They lived down the road from me before the accident. Elena used to bring Maddie over for cookies while Cal was on duty. She talked about him constantly, how proud she was, how lucky she felt. She knew the risks of being a pilot's wife, but she never let it stop her from supporting his dreams. Mrs. Chen's eyes grew distant. When she died, something in Cal broke. He stopped flying, stopped socializing, just buried himself in that cabin with Maddie. I've watched him for 10 years trying to convince himself he doesn't deserve to be happy again. He saved my life, Sloane said. Twice now. He saved a lot of lives. I know, but I don't think he's saved himself yet. That's the hard part. Sloane thought about that as the night wore on. Cal had spent a decade punishing himself for a crash that wasn't his fault, for a death he couldn't have prevented. He'd isolated himself, convinced he was too broken to be trusted with anyone's safety. But in the moment someone needed him, he'd become exactly who he used to be. The hero who flew into impossible situations and brought people home. The question was whether he could forgive himself enough to stay that person.
Dawn was breaking when Cal's hand twitched. Maddie was awake immediately, leaning forward. "Dad, can you hear me?" His eyes moved beneath the lids, rapid and searching. Then, slowly, they opened. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, confused and disoriented, before his gaze found Maddie's face. "Mads," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Maddie burst into tears. "You're awake. You're okay. I knew you'd wake up." Cal's eyes shifted to Sloane standing at the foot of the bed. "Sloane, Ryan. Ryan's alive. He's going to be fine. You saved him, Cal. You saved all of us." Cal closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his temple. Crashed. Again. Because the navigation system failed. Not because of you. Never because of you. "Elena, wasn't your fault either." Sloane moved closer, her voice fierce. "Cal, listen to me. We found the flaw. We know what happened to her helicopter and to mine and to Ryan's. It's all connected, and we're going to fix it. But you need to understand something. None of this was your fault. Not 10 years ago, not 3 days ago. You're not the reason people died. You're the reason people lived." Cal looked at her, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The guilt, the grief, the desperate need to believe her warring with a decade of self-blame. "I don't know how to let it go." "Then don't. Not yet. But maybe you can start by accepting that you did everything you could, that you're still doing everything you can, that you're exactly the man Elena believed you were." "How do you know what she believed?" "Because Maddie told me, and because I see it too." The doctor returned, gently shooing them out so she could examine Cal. Sloane and Maddie retreated to the hallway, both of them shaking with relief and exhaustion. "He's going to be okay," Maddie said, wonder in her voice. "He's really going to be okay." Sloane hugged her, this brave little girl who'd stolen her heart without trying. "Yeah, kiddo, he really is." Over the next 3 days, Cal's recovery progressed faster than anyone expected. The swelling in his brain decreased, his cognitive functions remained sharp, and the doctor started talking about discharge instead of complications. Sloane visited every day, sometimes with Maddie, sometimes alone, sitting beside his bed and talking about everything and nothing. She told him about the investigation. Dr. Webb had recovered the black box from the crashed helicopter and confirmed what they'd suspected. The navigation algorithm had inverted during the storm, feeding Cal false data and contributing to the tail rotor failure. The FAA was launching a full review of Harker Aviation systems, and preliminary reports suggested the flaw had been present in all 3 generations of their navigation equipment. "We're facing lawsuits," Sloane said, sitting in the chair beside Cal's bed while rain streaked the windows. "Families of pilots who died, insurance companies, regulatory penalties. The lawyers say we could be looking at bankruptcy if we're not careful." Cal, who was sitting up now and eating real food, watched her carefully. "Are you scared?" "Terrified, but also relieved. At least the truth is out now. At least we can start making it right. My father made mistakes, big ones, mistakes that cost lives." Sloane's voice was steady, but Cal heard the pain underneath. "I've been going through his personal files. There are emails, memos, conversations with the legal team about minimizing liability and managing public perception. He knew about the flaw, Cal. Maybe not the full extent, but he knew something was wrong and he chose to protect the company instead of fixing it. I'm sorry. Don't be. I needed to know. I needed to understand what I was really inheriting." She looked at him. "I'm going to testify. In front of Congress, the FAA, whoever wants to hear it. I'm going to tell them everything. And then I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure Harker Aviation becomes the company it should have been from the start." Cal reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact, and the gesture felt monumental. "That's going to be hard." "Harder than flying into a blizzard?" "Different kind of hard. The kind that lasts years instead of hours." "Then I guess I better get used to it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the rain. Maddie had gone to the cafeteria with Mrs. Chen, giving them this moment alone. Cal's thumb traced small circles on Sloane's palm, and she felt something shift between them again, something that went beyond gratitude, or shared trauma. "Sloan," Cal said quietly, "when I was in that cockpit, when everything was falling apart, I wasn't thinking about Elena. I was thinking about you." Sloan's breath caught. "Cal, I'm not saying I'm over her. I'm not sure I'll ever be over her. But for the first time in 10 years, I was flying towards something instead of away from it. I was flying to save you, and that matters." "It matters to me too." Sloan squeezed his hand. "You've saved my life twice now. I figure that makes you stuck with me." Cal almost smiled. "Is that how it works?" "That's exactly how it works. Life debt. It's very serious." This time he did smile, brief and genuine, and Sloan felt warmth spread through her chest. They were both broken people, scarred by loss and guilt and choices they couldn't take back. But maybe broken people could build something strong together. Maybe they could be each other's second chance. The moment was interrupted by Maddie bursting through the door, hot chocolate in hand and excitement on her face. "Dad, guess what? Mrs. Chen says we can adopt a dog when you get better. A real dog, not just pictures on my tablet." Cal shot Sloan a look that said, "Help me." But Sloan just grinned. "A dog sounds perfect, Maddie. Every hero needs a faithful companion." "See, Dad? Sloan agrees. We're getting a dog." Cal sighed, but his eyes were warm. "We'll talk about it when I'm not recovering from a traumatic brain injury." "That's not a no." Maddie climbed onto the bed beside him, careful of his injuries, and launched into an elaborate explanation of all the dogs she'd been researching. Cal listened with the patience of a man who'd had this conversation 100 times, his hand never leaving Sloan's. And Sloan sat there, watching this little family that had somehow become hers, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, aching hope that maybe the future didn't have to be about penance and responsibility. Maybe it could be about building something new from the wreckage of the past. On Cal's 5th day in the hospital, Sloan brought him something she'd been working on in secret. She waited until visiting hours were ending, until Mrs. Chen had taken Maddie home for dinner, then pulled a folder from her bag and set it on Cal's lap. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Cal opened the folder and found a thick stack of documents, investigation reports, engineering analyses, testimony transcripts, and at the very top, a death certificate. Elena Mercer's death certificate. But beneath the cause of death, equipment failure, someone had added a handwritten note. Manufacturer defect, Harker Aviation Navigation System Gen 2, known issue. Company negligence. Cal's hands shook. "How did you get this?" "I reopened Elena's case, officially. With the FAA, the NTSB, everyone who'd buried it the first time." Sloan's voice was fierce. "I made them re-examine the evidence. I made them admit what they'd ignored. And I'm going to make sure every family who lost someone because of our systems gets the same answers." Cal looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "This clears her name. The original report blamed pilot error." "I know. And it was wrong. Elena was an exceptional pilot. She did everything right. The system failed her. We failed her." Sloan's voice broke. "I can't bring her back, Cal. I can't undo what my company did. But I can make sure the truth is on record. I can make sure her death meant something." Cal set the folder aside and pulled Sloan into a hug, mindful of his healing ribs. She held him while he cried for the first time in a decade, held him through the grief and rage and relief of finally having answers. And when he was done, when his breathing had steadied and his grip had loosened, she whispered, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Let me help. Let us help." Cal pulled back, looking at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." "Because you ran into a burning helicopter to save me without knowing who I was. Because you flew into a storm to save a stranger. Because you're a good man who deserves to be free of guilt that was never his to carry." Sloan touched his face gently. "And because somewhere along the way, I started caring about you. A lot." Cal stared at her, something vulnerable and terrified crossing his features. "Sloan, I don't know if I can be what you need. I'm still broken. I still wake up at night hearing the crash. I still see Elena's face and feel like I'm drowning. Then we'll be broken together.
and maybe we'll figure out how to be whole again. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people trying to do better than yesterday. Cal touched her face, mirroring her gesture. I'd like that. Yeah? Yeah. They kissed then, soft and tentative, like two people learning how to trust again. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was careful, hopeful. The first step toward something neither of them could quite name yet. When they pulled apart, Sloane was smiling through tears. So what happens now? Now you go testify in front of Congress and fix your company. And I go home and explain to Maddie why we're definitely not getting a dog anytime soon. You're getting the dog. I know, I'm just delaying the inevitable. They both laughed, and it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. 2 days later, Cal was discharged. Sloane drove him and Maddie back to the cabin, the three of them cramped in her rental car with Mrs. Chen following behind in Cal's truck. The mountains were green and alive, the storm long past, and as they climbed the winding roads toward home, Maddie chattered nonstop about school and dogs, and how famous her dad was now that the news had covered his rescue mission. Cal was quiet, watching the familiar landscape roll past, and Sloane reached over to take his hand. He squeezed back, grateful and exhausted and more at peace than he'd felt in years. When they reached the cabin, Maddie ran inside to make sure everything was perfect for her dad's homecoming. Mrs. Chen bustled in with groceries, determined to stock the fridge properly, and Cal stood in the doorway with Sloane, looking at the place that had been his prison and sanctuary for a decade. I used to think this cabin was where I'd spend the rest of my life, he said quietly, just me and Maddie, hiding from the world. And now? Now I think maybe it's just where I was waiting, for something, for someone, for a reason to step back into the light. Sloane leaned against him carefully, mindful of his injuries. I'm glad you waited. Me too. They stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and for the first time since the night Elena died, Cal felt like the future was something to move toward instead of something to survive. And standing beside him, Sloane made a silent promise to the woman whose loss had brought them together. She'd protect Cal and Maddie. She'd fix what her company had broken. She'd make sure Elena Mercer's legacy was justice and truth, not buried secrets and corporate negligence. It wouldn't bring Elena back. Nothing could. But maybe, just maybe, it would give her family the peace they'd been denied for so long. And that was a start. The weeks that followed Cal's return home moved with the strange duality of healing, simultaneously too fast and achingly slow. His body mended faster than his spirit, the stitches coming out, the headaches fading, the ribs knitting back together until he could breathe without wincing. But the real work was happening in places no doctor could reach, in the quiet moments when he'd wake at 3 a.m. and find himself reaching for ghosts. Sloane stayed in Seattle, but she called every day, sometimes twice. They talked about everything. The investigation gaining momentum, the board meetings that turned hostile, the media circus that had set up permanent camp outside Harker Aviation headquarters. But they also talked about smaller things, what Maddie was learning in school, the stray dog that kept showing up at the cabin, the way the aspens were turning gold as autumn settled into the mountains. Congress wants me to testify next week, Sloane said one evening, her voice tight with exhaustion. Cal was sitting on his porch watching Maddie chase fireflies, the phone pressed to his ear. Full committee hearing. They're calling it an investigation into corporate negligence and aviation safety standards. Are you ready? I don't know. My lawyers want me to stick to prepared statements, admit nothing beyond what's already public record. But that's not what I'm going to do. Cal heard the determination in her voice, the steel that had kept her standing through everything. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell them everything about the flaw, the buried memo, my father's choices, about Elena and Ryan and every person who died because my company chose profits over safety. And then I'm going to outline exactly how we're going to fix it. They'll crucify you. I know, but it's the right thing to do. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You already knew. Sloane laughed, but it was raw. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Then borrow mine until yours catches up. There was a long silence filled with the sound of Maddie's laughter and distant thunder. Cal, when this is over, when the testimony is done and the investigations wrap up,
I want to come back to the cabin, to you and Maddie, if that's okay. Cal's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with healing ribs. It's more than okay. I don't want to rush anything. I know we're both still figuring this out. Sloan, come back. However long you need to stay, whatever this becomes, just come back. He heard her exhale, shaky and relieved. Okay, I will. The night before Sloan's testimony, Cal couldn't sleep. He stood in the basement of his cabin, surrounded by boxes he'd avoided for a decade, finally ready to face what he'd been hiding from. Elena's things were carefully packed, preserved like museum pieces, her flight jacket still smelling faintly of her perfume, her logbook filled with her neat handwriting, photographs of the three of them before Maddie could even walk. He pulled out their wedding photo, studying Elena's face. She'd been so young, so full of life, laughing at something he'd said just before the camera clicked. He'd loved her with every particle of his being. Losing her had nearly destroyed him. But standing here now, holding her picture, Cal realized something fundamental had shifted. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it no longer felt like drowning. It felt like remembering, like honoring, like carrying her with him instead of being buried by her absence. I met someone, he whispered to the photograph. Her name is Sloan. She's brave and broken and trying so hard to make things right. I think you'd like her. I think you'd want me to be happy. His voice cracked. I'm going to try, Elena. I'm going to try to be happy again. That doesn't mean I'm letting you go. It just means I'm letting myself live. He set the photo carefully on the shelf and climbed back upstairs, feeling lighter than he had in years. The congressional hearing was broadcast live. Cal watched from the cabin with Maddie curled beside him on the couch, both of them barely breathing as Sloan took her seat at the witness table. She wore a dark suit, her hair pulled back, her expression calm despite the cameras and the hostile faces of congressmen who'd already made up their minds about corporate greed and negligence. The chairman gavelled the hearing to order. Ms. Harker, you're here today to answer questions about systematic failures in Harker Aviation's navigation systems that may have contributed to multiple aircraft accidents over the past 15 years. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Sloan leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady. I do, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start by saying what should have been said years ago. Harker Aviation failed. We built systems with a critical flaw, we ignored warnings about that flaw, and people died because of our negligence. There's no excuse, no justification, just the truth that we chose wrong, and families paid the price. The room erupted, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. The chairman banged his gavel for order, but Sloan didn't flinch. She sat there with her spine straight and her conscience clear, ready to face whatever came next. For the next 4 hours, she answered every question with brutal honesty. Yes, her father had known about concerns with the Gen 2 system. Yes, internal memos had been buried. Yes, the company had prioritized market share and profit margins over comprehensive safety reviews. She presented documentation, engineering reports, email chains that painted a damning picture of institutional failure. But she also presented solutions. A complete redesign of the navigation architecture, third-party safety audits, a victim compensation fund, industry-wide reforms. She didn't hide behind lawyers or corporate doublespeak. She took responsibility, owned the failures, and committed to spending whatever it took to make things right. One congressman, red-faced and aggressive, leaned into his microphone. Ms. Harker, you're asking us to believe that you knew nothing about these issues until recently, that you inherited this mess from your father, but you've been CEO for 5 years. Why should we believe you're not just as culpable? Sloan met his eyes without wavering. Because if I'd known 5 years ago what I know now, I would have done exactly what I'm doing today. I would have grounded the fleet, fixed the systems, and told the truth. My father made choices I don't agree with, choices that cost lives. But I can't change the past. All I can do is make sure the future is different, and I'm willing to stake everything I have, my company, my reputation, my freedom, on making that happen. The congressman looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sloan's expression stopped him. This wasn't a woman protecting herself. This was a woman willing to burn down everything she'd inherited to do the right thing. When the hearing finally ended, Sloan didn't wait for the lawyers. She walked straight to the press area and gave an impromptu statement.
To every family who lost someone because of our failures, I'm sorry. Those words aren't enough. They'll never be enough. But I want you to know that Harker Aviation is setting up a compensation fund with no caps, no arbitration clauses, no legal roadblocks. If our systems contributed to your loss, we will make it right financially. And more importantly, we will make sure it never happens again.
Cal watched her face on the screen. This woman who'd gone from corporate CEO to crusader in the span of weeks, and felt something fierce and protective surge through him. She was doing this partly for him, partly for Elena, but mostly because it was who she was at her core, someone who couldn't live with lies. Maddie looked up at him. She's really brave, isn't she? Yeah, kiddo, she really is. Are you going to marry her? Cal choked on his coffee. What? Mads, we're figuring things out. But you like her. A lot. I can tell. It's complicated. Maddie rolled her eyes with the exasperation of youth. Grown-ups always say that, but it's not complicated. You like her. She likes you. She makes you smile. And she's nice to me. That's all that matters. Cal looked at his daughter, this wise little soul who'd been forced to grow up too fast, and wondered when she'd become smarter than him. You're right. It's not complicated. I do like her. A lot. Good.
Then tell her that when she comes back. I will. And Dad? I think Mom would like her too. Cal pulled Maddie close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Yeah, Mads. I think she would. 3 days later, Sloane stood in front of the Harker Aviation Board of Directors for what she knew would be the last time. The compensation fund had drained the company's reserves. The recalls and retrofits had cost hundreds of millions. The stock price had cratered, and the lawsuits were just beginning. David Chen sat at the table looking exhausted. The board has requested this emergency meeting to discuss the future of the company and your role as CEO. Sloane stood at the head of the table, looking at the faces of men and women who'd worked with her father, who'd helped build this company, who now saw her as a threat to everything they'd accumulated. Let me save you the trouble of voting. I resign, effective immediately. The room erupted in chaos. Half the board looked relieved, the other half looked panicked. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Weston, stood up. Ms. Harker, that's not necessary. We can work through this. No, we can't, because I'm not interested in working through anything. I'm interested in burning down every corrupt structure that allowed people to die for profit, and you can't do that from inside the boardroom. Sloane pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is my formal resignation, along with recommendations for restructuring the entire company. You'll want to read it carefully, because if you don't implement these changes voluntarily, I'll make sure the FAA and Congress force you to. Weston picked up the folder with shaking hands. You're destroying everything your father built. My father built a company on lies. I'm giving you a chance to build something better. Sloane turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and the compensation fund? I'm personally guaranteeing it with my inheritance. Every penny my father left me is going to the families he failed. Consider it his final act of accountability. She walked out of that boardroom with nothing but the clothes on her back and the keys to a rental car. No job, no company, no safety net. But for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. She drove straight to the mountains. Cal was working on the porch railing when he heard the car coming up the drive. He knew that engine, knew that particular pattern of hesitation on the rough patches. He set down his hammer and walked to the edge of the porch, waiting. Sloane climbed out of the car looking exhausted and beautiful and absolutely terrified. They stood there for a long moment, 10 feet apart, and Cal saw everything written on her face. The relief, the fear, the desperate hope that she'd made the right choice. I quit, she said, walked away from everything. I might have just made the biggest mistake of my life. Cal walked down the steps and closed the distance between them. Or the best decision. I don't have a plan. I don't have a job. I don't even know what I'm doing here except that I couldn't stay in Seattle another second, and this was the only place that felt like home. Cal pulled her into his arms, and Sloane collapsed against him, shaking with exhaustion and relief and emotions too big to name. He held her while she cried, held her while she finally let go of the weight she'd been carrying, held her until she could breathe again. You did it, he whispered into her hair. You told the truth, and you made it right,
And you survived. Barely. Barely counts. Sloane pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Cal, I need to tell you something. When I was in that boardroom walking away from everything my father built, all I could think about was you. About Maddie.
About that night in the storm when you chose to save me instead of yourself. I don't know what this is between us, and I don't know if I'm ready for anything serious, but I know I want to be here. With you. If you'll have me. Cal cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Sloane Harker, you can stay as long as you want. Days, weeks, years. I don't care. Just stay. Even though I'm a mess? Especially because you're a mess. We'll be messes together. She laughed through her tears, and then she kissed him. Not tentative this time, but deep and real and full of promise. And when they broke apart, Maddie was standing on the porch grinning like she'd orchestrated the whole thing. Does this mean Sloane's moving in? She called out. Cal looked at Sloane, raising an eyebrow. Does it? Sloane looked at the cabin, at the mountains, at this man and child who'd somehow become her entire world in the span of a few chaotic weeks. Yeah, I think it does, if that's okay. It's more than okay. Cal took her hand. Come on, let's get you settled. The months that followed were a study in rebuilding. Sloane took a job with the FAA as a safety consultant, using her insider knowledge to help implement the reform she'd recommended. It didn't pay much, but it gave her purpose. Cal started flying again, not rescue missions, but something safer. Aerial surveys for the Forest Service, his way of staying in the sky without risking the life Maddie needed him for. They settled into a rhythm. Sloane would work from the cabin during the week, traveling to Seattle for meetings when needed. Cal would fly his routes, come home to find dinner cooking and Maddie doing homework at the kitchen table. They'd eat together, talk about their days, slowly build something that felt like family. It wasn't always easy. Cal still had nightmares about the crash. Sloane still woke up at 3 a.m, panicking about lawsuits and testimonies. They both carried scars that wouldn't heal completely, but they learned to be gentle with each other's broken places, to give space when needed and support when asked. Maddie thrived. She got her dog, a scruffy rescue mutt named Phoenix, who followed her everywhere. She stopped having anxiety about her father leaving and started talking about college and becoming a pilot like her mom. And she adopted Sloane with the fierce loyalty of a child who'd been waiting for someone to complete their family. One evening in early spring, nearly 6 months after that first helicopter crash in the blizzard, Cal found Sloane standing at the edge of the ridge where everything had started. The snow had melted, revealing wildflowers and new grass. The mountains looked different in sunlight, less threatening, more majestic. Cal wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and crimson. I got a call today, Sloane said quietly, from the FAA. The final investigation report is done. They're officially attributing 17 crashes over the past 15 years to the navigation system flaw. 17 families getting answers, getting closure. That's because of you. It's because of us. If you hadn't saved me, if you hadn't shown me Elena's circuit board, if you hadn't been brave enough to tell your story, none of this would have happened. Cal pressed a kiss to her temple. Then I guess we make a good team. The best team. Sloane turned in his arms to face him. Cal, I have something for you. She pulled a small box from her pocket. Cal's heart stopped. Sloane, it's not what you think. Open it. He opened the box and found a ring, simple silver with an inscription inside. He held it up to the light, reading the 2 words engraved there. Don't leave. Sloane's eyes were bright with tears. That's what I said to you in the storm, when everything was falling apart and I thought we were going to die. I told you not to leave me, and you didn't. You stayed even when it meant crashing, even when it meant risking everything. So I'm asking you now, don't leave. Stay with me. Build this life with me. Let me be part of your family. Cal stared at the ring, at this woman who'd walked away from everything to stand with him in the wreckage and build something new. Sloane, are you proposing? I'm saying I love you, and I want forever, if you'll give it to me. Cal didn't trust his voice, so he just pulled her close and held her while the sun set behind them. When he could finally speak, his voice was rough with emotion. I love you too. And yes,
to all of it, to forever. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky. Two broken people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to heal together. Behind them, the cabin door opened and Maddie came running out with Phoenix at her heels. "Dad! Sloan! Come see!" "There's a fox in the yard and Phoenix is being super brave," and she stopped, seeing them standing there with matching expressions. "Wait, did something happen?" Cal held up the ring. "Sloan asked me to marry her." Maddie's eyes went huge. "And you said yes?" "I said yes." Maddie screamed with pure joy and launched herself at both of them, Phoenix barking and jumping around their feet. They stood there in a tangle of arms and laughter, this mismatched family that had been forged in tragedy and tempered by love. "So when's the wedding?" Maddie demanded. Sloan laughed. "We literally just got engaged 10 seconds ago." "But you're going to have one, right? Can I be the flower girl? Can Phoenix be in it too? Can we have it right here on the ridge?" Cal met Sloan's eyes over Maddie's head, and they shared a smile. "Yeah, kiddo, we'll have it right here on the ridge." "When?" "When the wildflowers bloom," Sloan said softly, "when everything is alive and new again." The wedding took place 3 months later on the ridge where Cal had first pulled Sloan from the burning helicopter. It was small, just Mrs. Chen, a handful of friends, Ryan Voss and his now wife who'd insisted on flying up for the ceremony. Maddie wore a yellow dress and carried wildflowers. Phoenix had a bow tie that he immediately tried to chew off, and Sloan walked down the makeshift aisle in a simple white dress that made Cal forget how to breathe. They exchanged vows under an arch that Cal and Maddie had built together, promising not perfection, but presence, not to forget the past, but to honor it while building something new. When the officiant pronounced them married, Maddie cheered so loud that birds took flight from the surrounding trees. At the reception, really just dinner at the cabin with too much food and terrible dancing, Ryan pulled Cal aside. His leg had healed well, though he still walked with a slight limp. "I never properly thanked you for coming into that storm, for not giving up." Cal shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." "Yeah, I do. I was lying there in the snow convinced I was going to die alone, and then I heard the rotors. I heard you fighting to keep that helicopter in the air. You didn't quit even when any sane person would have." Ryan's voice caught. "I'm getting married next month. I'm alive to marry the woman I love because you refused to leave me behind, so thank you for all of it." Cal clasped his shoulder, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Ryan had been his second chance, his proof that he could still save lives instead of just mourning the ones he'd lost. "You're welcome. And congratulations." As the sun set and the party wound down, Cal found himself standing at the edge of the ridge again, this time with his new wife beside him and his daughter asleep against his shoulder. The three of them looked out over the mountains that had taken so much but somehow given back even more. "What are you thinking?" Sloan asked softly. "That a year ago I was convinced I'd spend the rest of my life hiding up here, alone or broken, unable to forgive myself for something that was never my fault. And now? Now I have you. I have Maddie. I have a future that doesn't feel like punishment." He turned to look at her, this brilliant, brave woman who'd chosen him when she could have chosen safety. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for staying when I crashed, for loving me even when I didn't think I deserved it." Sloan leaned her head against his free shoulder, careful not to wake Maddie. "Thank you for running into the fire, for not letting me die, for showing me what real courage looks like." They stood there as the stars came out, three people who'd found each other in the storm and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unmovable, and for the first time since Elena's death, Cal felt at peace. He'd lost his first love to a tragedy he couldn't prevent. He'd spent a decade drowning in guilt and grief, but somewhere in that darkness, he'd found Sloan, found purpose, found a reason to step back into the light. And standing here now with his family, with the ring Sloan had given him pressed against his heart, Cal understood something fundamental. The crash had broken him. But breaking wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of learning how to rebuild. He'd saved Sloan twice. She'd saved him 1,000 times over just by believing he was worth saving.
And together, with Maddie sleeping between them and Phoenix curled at their feet, they'd build a life that honored the past without being trapped by it. A life filled with morning coffee and terrible jokes, with flying lessons and Sunday pancakes, with love that was hard-won and fiercely protected. The mountains had taken Elena, but they'd also given him Sloane. And maybe that was the truth about grief. It didn't disappear. It just made room for new love to grow alongside it. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Cal carried Maddie inside. Sloane followed, turning off lights and locking doors, Phoenix trotting behind her. They tucked Maddie into bed, Phoenix curling up at her feet, and then retreated to their own room. Cal pulled Sloane close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "I love you, Mrs. Mercer." Sloane smiled against his shoulder. "I love you too. And Cal?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not leaving. Not in the storm, not in the hospital, not ever." "I'll never leave," he promised. "That's what the ring means. That's what forever means." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two people who'd survived the worst and chosen the best. And in the morning, they'd wake up to Maddie demanding pancakes and Phoenix stealing socks and all the beautiful chaos of the life they'd built together. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the mountain cabin, they were simply at peace. The storm had passed, the wreckage had been cleared, and from the ashes of tragedy, something stronger had emerged. A family, a future, a love that had been forged in fire and tempered by truth. And on the ridge where it all began, where Cal had run into the blizzard to save a stranger who'd become his everything, wildflowers bloomed in the morning sun, a promise that even in the hardest places, life finds a way to begin again.